We have heard from Commissioner Šefčovič the underlying geopolitical, economic and legal aspects that impact the supply of energy into Europe and what EU is doing to address these challenges under the strategy of energy union. Before we open the panel, I would like to share the ground rules of this little piece of workshop. As Mr. Cerna was already mentioning, I would like to open the floor to a couple of questions directed to Commissioner Šefčovič, and then we will continue the panel with maximum 5 minutes interventions from each of the panelists, followed by discussion on what people say, and then followed by another opening session for the room for the audience to ask questions. So without further ado, questions for Commissioner Šefčovič. Couple of them, maximum 3.
The interconnection between Romania and Bulgaria has become a local joke here. What if additional delays will put in danger the cooperation and the project? The second, could and under what conditions the pipe between Ungheni and Chișinău be eligible for the EU financing as a part of the energy union? And thirdly, what about Ukraine, having in mind that the energy union is not only about supply, but equally about security, yes, part of the security of the European Union? How to protect and to safeguard the situation of Ukraine, knowing that the Red Army was always replaced by Gazprom in recent years, and Ukraine may face isolation with the project Nord Stream 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the great cooperation on all the energy security files in the European Parliament and answering the concrete questions. Interconnectors, Bulgaria, Romania, and of course Romania, Moldova are very important for the regional energy security, but I would also say for the energy union as such, because I mentioned it several times, and I think that this is common understanding which goes across the whole European Commission, and I also believe across the European Parliament and the Council, that energy union doesn't stop at European Union's border. Because it's quite clear that our energy networks, our energy cooperation is very much intertwined with our neighbors, be it in Western Balkans, be it in Moldova, be it in Ukraine, or be it in the Mediterranean basin. It's very clear that in a field like energy and energy training, we clearly need to cooperate very closely with our partners. And I have to say that after this morning meetings with the Prime Minister Ponta, with Andrei, the Minister of Energy, I think that we progressed very well in our discussions concerning on the both projects. So Bulgaria and Romania, we concluded that the ideal situation would be to complete it next year. And on the Moldova and Romania, I'm very glad to say that on Monday I had a very fruitful meeting with Prime Minister Strelets, who came to Brussels to join as 16th country our CSIS cooperation. He signed the joint declaration, and of course this interconnector and the prolongation of the interconnector from the border to the Chișinău was actually the major topic we discussed. So I think that we have good ingredients. We have to overcome the usual issues linked with the permitting, with the public procurement, with the financing, but I think we are working on all of them in a way that these interconnectors would be built as soon as possible, and I'm sure to the benefit of the region and both countries. Concerning the Ukraine, here I think it's quite clear position of the European Union, which was not expressed only by myself or the representatives of the Commission, but we have unanimous agreement on the conclusions of the foreign ministers from July of this year. It's clearly stated that preservation of the transit gas corridor through Ukraine is of very high importance to the energy security of the European Union. And therefore I'm quite encouraged when I read, I think this week, the latest statement of the President Putin that they are going to support the continuation of Ukrainian transit route. I think it's very important for Ukraine. It's very important for the possibility not only to transit the gas, but also to profit from the reverse flows from the Western Europe. It's very important for the revenue of Ukrainian budget, and it's very important for the overall energy security of European Union because of the strategic importance of the Ukrainian gas storages, which are among the biggest in Europe. So that's one of our priorities, and I think we have to work together with our Ukrainian partners on the energy reforms, on the restructuring of the traditional companies of the Ukraine, on the proper implementation of the third package, which was introduced by this new gas law in Ukraine, which has entered into force as of 1st of October, and of course to help them to overcome the coming winter, which I think we managed to do through the approval of the trilateral gas binding protocol between Russia, Ukraine, and the European Commission, which creates good preconditions for making sure that also next winter would be without any gas dramas, and that we would be able to secure enough gas for Ukrainian domestic consumption, but also to make sure that transit through Ukraine would be safe and secure as for the next winter, also for the next years. Thank you.
The question is, you said European Energy Union doesn't stop at the borders of Europe. So I want to come to Turkish question. You referred it several times, but in clear terms, what do you mean by this? Do you mean that countries like Turkey could become part of European Energy Union? If so, what does it mean in concrete terms beyond rhetorical statements? Secondly, do you feel that there is genuine, underlining genuine, partnership, win-win partnership between EU and Turkey on energy matters, involving Caspian, involving EastMed, Kurdish, Iranian and Russian issues, rather than ad hoc basis discussions? And we feel in Ankara that there isn't much substance into this partnership that we talk a lot about. And how do you think this could be expanded? So perhaps time for 3 hours to talk about this.
We are very, very sincere about the fact that we don't think that the energy union should stop at the European Union border. And of course, Turkey is in a very privileged position as a candidate country, as a country with which we have a high-level energy dialogue, the country with which we discuss and we are working together on such a strategic project like Southern Gas Corridor. I was personally in Kars, which is a city in Turkey through which the Southern Gas Corridor pipeline is being routed, where we've been actually opening the construction of this pipeline. And we are working together with representatives of Turkey and all other countries which are very much involved in the process of building up of Southern Gas Corridor from Azerbaijan through Albania, Greece and Italy. And we even established such a special advisory council, which is making sure that this project is being executed on time, is progressing well, and that we would have new Caspian gas in Europe before 2020. On top of it, of course, we are discussing with Turkey other projects. I was just learning about the new developments of the plans of electricity cooperation between Romania and Turkey. As you know, we pay a lot of attention to develop the Mediterranean as a very important energy hub, not only for gas, also for the electricity, and with the new discoveries close to Israel, new discoveries around Cyprus, new discoveries in the Egyptian basin. I think that's lots of things to issue, to discuss, and Turkey is in the position of being very strategic crossroad for the energy routes to Europe. So I think it's just really natural that the Turkey and European Union would continue this high-level discussion, that we would really be working on this issue together, because I believe that it would be, of course, profitable for both. So it's, I would say, not some kind of formal nicety, but it's actually real work which is already happening on the ground, and I have to say that we've been very encouraged by the cooperation we had with Turkey on the energy issues over the last years, and definitely since we started the Energy Union project.
Let's continue with the debates on our panel. I would like to invite Ambassador Constantinescu to share his thoughts with us on the theme of our panel and the discussions that have just taken place.
However, I will share with you my strong impression I have after several meetings within this famous CSEC framework of cooperation, regional cooperation that the Commissioner has mentioned here. Probably it's the first time in many years when we really have the feeling that the countries in the region are on the spot, are really trying to work together, and with the facilitation of the Commission, we are trying to create a common denominator of the interest at a regional level. What is important, and I am proud as a Romanian that we have managed to put on the European Union energy security map and on the future Energy Union map to put not only Romania as a transit country for the future fluxes of gas, future fluxes of supply to European Union, but also to put the Black Sea on the strategic map of the energy security for the European Union. This is an important development. It's important not only from the perspective of economics, but also from the perspective of strategic perception of this region, and as well as we are talking about Romania. I do not want to enter here into details of the projects. The Minister mentioned here the cooperation between countries in the region for setting the Brua corridor, the interconnections for setting the interconnections with Moldova, which are a priority for the Romanian energy agenda. But what I want to mention are three political messages that are appropriate to give from Bucharest and are appropriate to give in the context of the visit of Vice President Šefčovič. When we talk about future energy union, it's important to think that the design of the future architecture of new pipelines entering EU or supplying with gas from different third parties suppliers need to respond to the attributes of enhancement of the security, for diversification of the gas supply, and also must comply with EU rules. This is very important, and Romania will be very firm in promoting and safeguarding this principle of obeying to EU rules, namely the third energy package. The second message is that for Romania, as well for other countries in Central and Eastern Europe, Ukraine is a critical transit country for the supply of the European Union with gas. Together with Moldova, we consider that our neighborhood deserves better attention, much more attention from the strategic energy security point of view. So Ukraine will support the continuation of the transit of the gas supplies through Ukraine, and we'll do our best in order to cooperate with the Ukrainian partners, be them in the business sector or the authorities, in order to facilitate the transformation of their energy system in order to become more responsible, more transparent, and more market-oriented. And the third message refers to the transatlantic relation. Unfortunately, I haven't heard too much today about the transatlantic relation and the importance of this ingredient in the future energy union. And from this perspective, I think that this relation is and should remain strategic, indispensable and beneficial for the future energy union. Be them, if you are talking about sharing the best practices, best information, best technologies for progressing in the technologies in the energy sector, or even to adopt some of the conclusions of the recently adopted US quadrennial technological review, which presents a set of new policies that could alleviate the energy security in many parts of the world. Next week in Brussels, in Washington, will convene the EU-US Energy Council. It's an important framework of cooperation and opens and must open new ways of cooperation in adopting new technologies that could enforce the 5th pillars of the European Union. And from this perspective, Romania strongly supports the agenda, endorses the agenda of this EU-US Energy Council. Also mentioning in this agenda the progress needed in the energy sector for the cooperation regarding the TTIP negotiations, but also from the perspective of setting a comprehensive strategy for research and introducing new technologies at the level of the European Union and at the level of the future energy union. I'm representing a country which has a very poor record in terms of innovation and research in the energy sector. Unfortunately, we are counting only with 0.1 patents to 1 million persons in comparison with 4.8 at the level of European Union, 2.6 at the level of the US, much more in Japan, for example, but we are not comparing with Japan at this stage. But if we really want to bridge a gap and be serious about this 5th pillar of the energy union, we must convince our partners in the Commission, our partners at the level of the European Union, to put much more money and to create a more equitable distribution of the funding and of, first of all, of the attention regarding the need to develop the resources of innovation and research in the energy and environment sector. Probably I will intervene, but I do not want to take too much time for my first intervention.
We will now move on. Secretary Tsipras, Greece is one of the key players of the Southern Gas Corridor. What is the Greek view on the energy security in Southeastern Europe and Eastern Mediterranean? And how is Greece fitting in the broad European energy security strategy? That would be something I would like to hear from you.
It's an honor to participate in this session especially. So let me consult my written points. Greece, first of all, strongly supports the initiative of building an energy union. It considers that energy security should be the main pillar of the energy union, since the International Energy Agency defines energy security as the uninterrupted availability of energy sources at an affordable price. We believe that European citizens should be provided with secure, sustainable, and affordable energy sources. EU security of energy supply is a matter of collective action and presupposes consultation and close cooperation among all member states, not only some of them. An essential component is the diversification of sources and routes of fossil fuels. No country should depend totally on one supplier. The Ukrainian crisis manifested the need that transit of energy in whichever form should be consistent with the principle of freedom of transit and without distinction as to the origin, destination, or ownership. The most effective way to ensure energy security without modifying what has been established by the European treaties and other treaties is to enhance regional cooperation approaches. For Greece, it is important to focus on improving energy interconnections in electricity, oil and gas among the countries of southeastern Europe, given the vulnerability of our region and the need for energy supplies. It is obvious that our efforts should be aimed at creating the conditions that will make our markets more competitive and will increase their liquidity, create common initiatives in security of supply, and incentivize investments. As a European, Mediterranean and Balkan country, but also as a country that belongs to the wider Black Sea neighborhood, Greece envisions to playing a significant role towards the enhancement of cooperation in the field of energy, security, route and source diversification, and infrastructure development. Energy security and diversification are issues of top priority for our country. Greece is included in the countries of southeastern Europe, which are vulnerable with regard to the supply security of natural gas. And this is important. This is recorded not only in the European Energy Security Strategy, but also in the stress test report, which took place in the summer of 2014. Of course, since 2000, we have managed to reduce our dependence on Russian gas from 100% to around 50 to 60%, by adding to our energy mix both LNG and gas from other sources. Greece intends to enhance its role as an energy security provider for Europe, becoming a physical hub, gas hub, in southern, eastern, or maybe central Europe, given the delivery of Aspen volumes through the Southern Gas Corridor and TAP, Transatlantic Pipeline, the access to LNG in the Aegean, and the potential for the development of gas resources in the East Mediterranean. The vertical corridor represents also an excellent source diversification option for the region. The completion of the interconnector Greece-Bulgaria, IGB, will enhance the organic growth of the existing network. At the same time, the prospect of a new dedicated pipeline that will bring Russian gas to southern Eastern Europe or Central Europe is also very significant. Russia's position as an energy supplier to Europe remains very important, either through the Balkans country or through Italy. Nord Stream number 1, proves that any form of a South Stream can be also viable and in the context of the EU legislation, especially the third energy package. Furthermore, I would like to emphasize the importance of bolstering energy cooperation as a tool to safeguard security and stability in the East Mediterranean volatile regions. So before I conclude, I would like to stress some points. We believe that the more supply networks are created in the Southern Eastern Europe region, the more stability and energy security increases. To this respect, we support every infrastructure project which will create conditions of secured energy supply for the countries of Southern Eastern Europe and will contribute to the diversification of energy sources and routes. Greece's support in various energy infrastructure projects in our region is not a matter of competition for us. We want to become an energy hub, achieving the maximum level of diversification, both through pipelines or by transporting energy resources by other means. Greece aims to become a hub of diversified routes and sources, ensuring competitive prices to the benefits of millions of consumers in our regions. In particular, we support the Trans-Adriatic pipeline as part of the Southern Corridor, which will bring natural gas from Azerbaijan via Turkey to Greece, Italy, and the rest of Europe. Through the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, Greece becomes a strategic entrance of energy supplies into Southern East Europe. The development of a new vertical gas corridor connecting Greece, Bulgaria, and Romania aims to ensure uninterrupted bidirectional supplies while promoting the EU priority corridor, north-south and southern corridors. Also, the Greece-Bulgaria interconnector, IGB, as a central part of the vertical corridor, constitute a priority project not only for Greece and Bulgaria, but also for the European Union's new energy strategy. At last, but not least, the prospect of Turkish Stream, a new dedicated pipeline that will bring Russian gas to southern, eastern, and central Europe, will constitute an additional natural gas route, which also contributes to the security of the supply in the region. From a political point of view, we support the plan for this pipeline, which will start from the Greek-Turkish border, taking into account, in any case, the EU regulatory framework and condition of financing. So, concluding, as a country, we are willing to discuss all available diversification options or scenarios of sources and routes in our region, considering the interests of the forces of the market, and to explore the prospects of compatibility with EU regulations. We believe that the Commission, the European Commission, in its efforts for ensuring energy security, should undertake drastic initiatives to combat energy poverty, curb energy inequalities amongst the European countries and regions, enhance energy infrastructure, bridge the technology gap, and reduce the energy cost in the weaker economies of Europe. Thank you very much.
I would like to now move on to Mr. Edward Chow, and I would like to focus the opening remark would be transatlantic cooperation on the energy security, issues such as emissions and environment protection, oil prices, new discoveries, energy investments. They have a lasting impact on the dynamics of the energy security, both sides of the pond. We are entering the final year of the Obama administration. Europe most certainly is looking at what comes next. It seems that Russia and Europe will continue to be together, at least in the gas trade sector at least. My question to you is, what will the transatlantic cooperation on energy security would look like in the future, and what will drive it? What can we expect from American leadership regarding its European allies on energy security? And we know we cannot take politics out of the energy, but can we put some energy into our transatlantic policies in the future?
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here in Bucharest again for the Bucharest Forum. I'm very happy to hear Mr. Šefčovič tell us about the energy union, because I'm going to miss him when he's in Washington next week. I'm going to be in California. I have to say, first of all, confess as an American that we're not very good at strategies. We tend not to do strategies in spite of our political rhetoric on strategy. We tend to think, at least on energy, to try to get the fundamentals right on a market economy for energy, and then improvise like crazy when the opportunity presents itself. Any strategy we would talk about would only be in hindsight rather than foresight. So it's really interesting to listen to a European with a different perspective. I think it's difficult for an outsider to understand what the energy union really means, to be honest with you. What's it for? Is it for market integration, which is very important in southeastern Europe? Is it to make sure that investment conditions are there, provide investment conditions to allow private sector investment to come in on, among other things, energy infrastructure? Is it just a whole bunch of pork barrel projects, projects of common interest, where Spanish interconnectors will compete with interconnectors in this part of the world? Is it about climate policy? I think there's a risk when you do a strategy of trying to be all things to all people and end up with something that looks like less of the sum of its parts than more than the sum of the part, which I'm sure is the objective. I want to follow the admonition at the beginning that be more than the talk shop, that we should think about action. So at the risk of not being invited again to the next Bucharest Forum, permit me to be blunt and also maybe share some practices, as my friend Ambassador Constantinescu have mentioned, from the think tank world in the United States. For as long as I remember, I've heard of Romanians talking about using your location advantage to be a transit corridor for Caspian oil and gas. Certainly from the first time your previous president visited Washington, I've heard about it. There are all kinds of projects proposed. Constanza comes up regularly. I haven't seen much action on that score in the last few years. And what are the impediments to that? What are the barriers that government policy need to remove in order for that to happen? And I think those are the kinds of things that we need to focus on. Part of Southeastern Europe's vulnerability on energy, and now I'm going beyond Romania, has to do with business practices in the region of incumbents who are not interested in competition, incumbents who are very keen on continuing the traditional business practices with the traditional business partner. And I think you know what I'm talking about. I visited Bulgaria during Mr. Borisov's first time as prime minister, 3 times, and I met with him and his ministers, and came away with the conclusion that he was never going to do anything, at least not then. Maybe things will change this time around. And shortly after I left him, I think he gave Mr. Putin a puppy, didn't he, Lydia? And so, there's a reason why we don't have a Greek-Bulgaria interconnector. There's a reason why we don't have a Romania-Bulgaria interconnector. And we've got to face those reasons. The reasons, at least in the case of Bulgaria, has to do with vested interests in Bulgatransgas. Even Bulgarian Energy Holding, which was created to promote these projects, became a barrier to implementing them. So if European policy is to have meaning, it needs to address those questions, it seems to me. A second major point in the region I would make is that Ukraine is not going to fix itself. If Mr. Šefčovič were present right now, I would congratulate him for kicking the can down the road for one more winter with the recent deal, which was very important for everyone to have. Well, right now in Ukraine, which is a neighbor of Romania's, of course, you have a race between reform and the third Maidan. And you have an economy that is collapsing at close to 10% negative economic growth this year. Things are very precarious. And it does transatlantic policy no good for Washington or Brussels or major European capitals to think that we can muddle through. 20-some years of experience on Ukraine should teach us the lesson that Ukraine always muddles down. It doesn't muddle up. So this is something that we really need to face. On the transatlantic relationship, again, being very frank, we're going completely different directions on energy security and energy dependence. We are approaching 90% self-sufficiency on oil and gas. You all are heading the other way. And whether that alignment of interests, for example, in the Caspian region, that exists in the 1990s are still there or not, is very questionable. And it has nothing to do with the Obama administration. It has nothing to do with the next administration. It has something to do with the facts are very, very different. At the EU embassy in Washington a few weeks ago, I met with a European envoy, who I won't name, but you are free to guess, who is new on the Central Asia portfolio. And some of us think tankers ask him, well, what are the hard interests that Europe has in Central Asia? He could not articulate it. Energy did not come up once, by the way. It was about human rights, democracy, rule of law, all environment, all very important issues. But some of us said to him that if you can't define your hard interests, it's very hard for leaders in the region to deal with you, because they don't know what you're about. And if you were able to define your hard interests, you would actually give you more scope to work on the humanitarian issues than if you couldn't. So what is the strategy? What is the role that Romania and the EU wants to play? If energy security is a public good, which some of us believe it is, then you could socialize the cost of that public good. As the Lithuanians did, for example, with the LNG, floating LNG import terminal. I have heard about Constanța LNG longer than the Lithuanians first came up with the idea for the first time. So you could socialize the cost, or you could allow the investment conditions to exist so that there's a business case to be made. But you can't hedge and not decide, because that would lead to no action, but a strategy and a vision, perhaps. So I'm very encouraged to hear Mr. Šefčovič talk about an action plan by the end of next year, but also for Romania to figure out what its role in that action plan might be. But I can't give you a lot of optimism on transatlantic energy cooperation, regardless of the rhetoric that both sides are willing to divulge in it. And I can do that because I'm not in government, and after this I will never be in government. So thank you.
Let's move on to our next panelist, Mr. Mehmet Öğütçü. Market integration is critical for smaller countries in this region in order for them to achieve better diversity of energy supplies. The energy industry relies on economy of scale to justify significant investment. The entire population of the Balkans is smaller than the population of Turkey alone. Turkey is a completely different player altogether, and a player that has a critical and important relationship both with Europe and with the US and Russia. You have advocated for a southern energy corridor, rather than a southern gas corridor. Do you think that one day the southern energy corridor will combine flows of oil, gas, and electricity in both directions? Is this a viable solution for the energy security of Europe and Turkey?
I'd like to thank also in the beginning the organizers for putting together such a high-powered and rich content meeting. And I'd like to pick up also from where Ed left, actually, in terms of gently bashing the European Union a little bit. Too much blueprints, green, blue, white papers, 2030s, 2050s, but so much disconnected from the reality on the ground, unfortunately. I'm a former diplomat, but also a businessman right now, so the business world looks for different approaches rather than long on strategies, but short on actions. And under the European Union, we, I think, recycled so many things, as Commissioner explained, and also Ed also expanded on. Still not so clear to us. Take the projects of common interest. To be precise, there are 268 projects of common interest. Where is the prioritization? Where we are going to focus? And also, in terms of competitiveness, we had, Lisbon 2010 vision, as you remember. 2010 came and gone, but nothing happened. In terms of competitiveness, we are still behind. And energy is a key component of enhancing the European Union's competitiveness in the world. Therefore, if you allow me, before moving to Southern Energy Corridor, I'd like to say a few words about the game changers in the rest of the world, which will have a significant bearing on the European Union's performance. And most importantly, I think, when you look at the pictures, we see a changing map of world energy demand and supply picture. It's a different world. I mean, the word is use, abuse, misuse, game changers. One of them is that demand is no longer on that part of the world. more coming from the Asia-Pacific region led by China and India. Forget about the slowdown there, new normal of 7% in China. The potential is there. Strong growth demand will come from that region. Not only from that region, also Middle East and Gulf, we always thought that this is a basically supply region. But they are going to suffer significantly from the shorter supply. So demand is growing very fast. Look at Egypt. They used to export LNG, now they have to import. And Saudi Arabia, likewise, if they continue to consume the way they do, and by 2050, Saudi Arabia might have to import crude oil. That's the reason why they are moving into renewables as well as nuclear in many ways. China, the share of natural gas, which is a common concern for all of us, in China's energy mix is currently about 5%. The world average is around 22%. There's a huge potential for demand for natural gas. And so it's going to increase, perhaps quadruple in the next 20 years. LNG, now both in volumes and prices, we see a convergence of LNG and pipeline gas. In Australia, as of today, there are 7 projects under construction, LNG projects. Once they are complete, this country will be providing half of what Russia sells to Europe, 80 BCM of gas coming to the market. So we are moving into the buyer's market in many ways, both in pipelines as well as LNG. Pipeline gas, still, we are not talking about Iran. It's going to take a long time for Iran to mobilize its, the world's second largest gas reserves and putting it into where the demand, high demand is. You need to invest in production, then infrastructure. It will take a long time, but it will happen. Turkmenistan is landlocked. We keep talking about bringing Turkmen gas to Europe across Caspian. I always joke. I mean, so long as Putin is there is only one way to bring the Turkmen gas across the Caspian. Send it as an email attachment. And Iran will never allow that because they sell at a high price their own gas. Azeris, I think, will be also reluctant because they have their Absheron, Ümit, Nakhchivan, so many new gas fields coming up. And EastMed gas, in this environment where most of the big-ticket, capital-intensive projects have been put on hold or cancelled, will be quite difficult to justify, both in Israel, Leviathan, and we shall see about the Egyptian discovery. It's going to take some time. And Europe has more than, I think, around 19 receiving terminals, so LNG will be, of course, one of the options for that. And geopolitical tensions will make life difficult for us. Without security, physical security, supply security, and also cyber security, you can't have sustainable flow of energy as well. And how are you going to deal with all these ISIS issues in Iraq and Syria? Now, Russia becoming also Turkey's not only northern neighbor, but also southern neighbor somehow. And the Caspian issues, EastMed, Israel, Egypt, Turkey, Cyprus, and South Sea China, Malacca Strait dilemma. So there are so many hot points in the world that will make life difficult and keep us awake at night, thinking how we will be dealing with these issues. Having said that, perhaps I could briefly mention about the potential supply sources for European Union, apart from Russia. No matter whatever we say in terms of reducing our dependence on Russia, Russia is there and will be there. And it's a huge resource country. They use energy as a weapon against us. Now we are using it against Russia as well. Sanctions. And, but we have to find a way to manage Russia as a reliable partner and in the next few decades to come. Russia also shouldn't have illusions that if EU doesn't work, Turkey, second largest market, doesn't work, we have Asia market where the demand is. It will take ages to build this infrastructure. And I was in the embassy in Beijing when they signed this Irkutsk agreement for the first time. They say everything is okay, 90%, we agreed. And since then, 89, and still many agreements signed, but nothing is happening, because this one person is about the price. And also the Russian concern not to be somehow constrained only to Chinese market. And so both Russia and I think EU are interdependent in a big way. So they have to find the way in terms of business models and political engagements. And the one big project that Russia is pushing forward, or two projects I should say, in their new business model or gas strategies is Nord Stream 2. They want to increase the capacity to 110 BCM. So Germany gets about 80, so the rest will be distributed to the rest of the Europe, and Germany will be a distributor there. Realistic or not, I think we have to see, because we're discussing with Ed before the meeting that the buyers are reputable companies already committed, so it's highly likely that this could happen. The other project is Turkish Stream, when Putin came and killed the South Stream in Ankara and reincarnated it as Turkish Stream. There was a euphoria, 63 BCM of gas coming under the Black Sea, not to Bulgaria, but to Turkey. And now we have problems going on. First about the price, second about the volume. I think the first leg shouldn't be a problem, because Turkey is already getting about 15 BCM of gas via Ukraine. If this comes directly through Black Sea and Russians are paying for that, I don't think that there will be any problem. And now Gazprom also reduced it by half almost, saying we will reduce it to 34 BCM. So we shall see how it will go. But the sensitivities in Syria will have some impact on that. And Turkish president used, I think, a bit threatening language, and the Russians trying to calm it down, separate what's happening in Syria from the energy partnership, which is a package deal between Turkey and Russia. It involves nuclear power stations, downstream investment, blue stream, security, defense, energy, tourism, so many other areas. So our trade volume is about to go to around, I think, $100 billion. So it's a very important partner. I don't think it can be disrupted in a serious way. Both sides will find a way to deal with it. In Southern Gas Corridor, not energy, I don't like using this term, corridor. I think what we have there is 16 BCM of gas from Shah Deniz 2, and 6 to Turkey, 10 to Southeast Europe, and down the Adriatic to Italy. 10 BCM is a peanut in the whole matter that we are discussing. And therefore, I would call it a forerunner of Southern Gas Corridor, perhaps, because once you have other gas flowing, it will be a magnet attracting, once, of course, FID is done and new production coming from Kurdistan. I'm very much interested in Iraqi Kurdistan. I'm on the board of a company producing the largest amount of oil there, and we will be producing also gas from 2019. And up to 10 BCM of gas will come from Kurdistan. Iran, one day, they currently sell 10 BCM, could sell even more. And Azerbaijan can increase. And EastMed gas, you know, where it will go. I think with the new discoveries in Egypt, there is a highly likelihood of Turkey getting into the picture again as the off-taker, and also adding it to the Southern Gas Corridor. So then, if you are talking, and then Turkish Stream, if you are talking about 50, 60 BCM of gas, then yes, it could be a corridor, a fourth artery for European Union. Then what will happen in Norway? Because Norway is second to Russia in terms of supply to European Union. North Africa, Algeria, Libya, huge potential there, underutilized. The pipeline from Algeria to Spain, almost a third of the capacity is being used. But the potential is there. And LNG, I think, will be also a game changer, because we shall see what will happen in the transatlantic relationship, whether from Sabine Pass, Chenery,
or it takes its money.
Whether the pricing will be good. But I think the price LNG in Europe now is better than in Asia Pacific compared to Pass. And there was a huge difference between three basins, Atlantic, Europe, and Asia Pacific. And this is also changing. Price means everything, actually. We can do lots of talks among ourselves. The governments could have strategies. European Union can write another new paper for 2050, but at the end of the day, the price will determine the commerciality, the viability of the projects. And Turkey is a country which I call has a huge soft belly. And because we depend on imported energy to a great extent, in natural gas it's 98%. We only produce 2% of our need. In oil, 93%. and most of them coming from Russia and also neighboring countries. So therefore, it's not only an energy security matter for us, it's a national security matter. Why? Because Turkey is a regional economic powerhouse. Demand is growing so fast, faster than our GDP growth, about 6% demand growth. And it's the largest economy in the region. So we need energy to fuel, it's just like China in a way. And therefore, I think there is a commonality of interest between EU and Turkey in terms of making sure that first, there is a stable environment in which production, look at Iraq. Iraq can increase its production to 10 million barrels a day from the current less than 3 million, I think. If there is stability, security, if there is sufficient investment flowing there, Iran will have the same question. So we all have interest in making sure that there is geopolitical stability in the region for production, for transit arrangement. Secondly, again, Ed mentioned this, the business environment should be conducive to investment. We need around, I think, $37 trillion of investment between now and 2040. OPEC Secretary General, in a meeting last week in London we attended together, he was saying that we need $15 trillion only for oil sector. Where will this money come from? The money is there. Just an issue of finding the safe investment. In Turkey we need $120 billion for energy and associated infrastructure investment over the next decade. It has to come, it will come, this way or another. Therefore, I think the clear message is that the EU, I think, should focus more on the regulatory issues without making it excessively difficult to do business, and give perhaps strategic orientations, but leave the private enterprises and governments a little bit alone, because it's not a homogeneous union. 28 countries, each of them have different energy mix. France, nuclear, then Bulgaria 100% dependent on Russia, Spain, Italy, Germany, coal, renewables, and there are so many differences. And how could you put all of them in the same basket and treat in the same way? So there is need for more flexibility for European Union to develop its strategies, policies, but effective implementation in a business-friendly manner. Otherwise, nothing will happen, because investors will not put money into your corridors, to your projects of common interest. Let me stop here, and I'm sure there will be questions where I can also step in and answer.
I would like to now address the Mr. Bochkarev, and I would like to ask for your view in the energy transport infrastructure needs of the region. I understand you know almost everything that is to be known about this subject, so if you'd like to address the room. Thank you.
If we come back, for instance, I mean, let's say to all these projects, Mehmet was mentioning, let's say Russian project, Turkish Stream or Nord Stream, I mean, let's say, they didn't just come out of the blue. They're part of a bigger grand strategy, which already has more than 10 years old in Russia. It's avoidance of transit. I mean, let's say transit is considered to be, if it's not inside the European Union, it's something, let's say, unpleasant, unstable, unpredictable, and the way is the essential way is getting direct connections to the countries, I mean, it's which matters. And then would it be China, Germany, or Turkey? I mean, it's a very interesting thing. And if we are talking about the first actual leg of the Turkish Stream, interesting, if you see the amount of capacity, it's exactly the amount of gas sold to Greece and to Turkey via the Western Balkan routes. I mean, so basically to the countries, I mean, let's say, which are crucial, I mean, let's say, for Russia from economic and political point of view, and this part of Mediterranean. If we're talking about, let's say, Nord Stream, I mean, let's say, there are maybe some doubts whether the capacity would be really 110 BCM, but for sure, I mean, let's say, I think we can guarantee what's actually, at least the third string will be built. So what will happen with Ukrainian transit? I mean, and here comes quite a tricky point, because when you calculate transportation capacity, you shouldn't only look on the amount of yearly volumes passing by, but definitely see on the daily volumes, because the daily volumes during the especially cold weather, they can be very high, 3-4 times more than average, or let's say the summer volumes at least. And here comes an interesting point on what will happen with Ukraine infrastructure, and why, for instance, as of May, June, there was a shift in the Russian policy, I mean, at least semi-official, regarding Ukraine and Ukrainian transit. I mean, let's say the same, what we're going to keep for it. I mean, the question is, and was some numbers put, it's like as a 15 BCM, etc. So Ukraine will be in any case very like indispensable for the peak volumes, especially during the winter or during the maintenance period for like pipelines. Would it be like Turkish Stream or like Yamal or North Stream? I mean, the thing is, like, we might see quite an interesting development where, I mean, definitely Commissioner was mentioning is a reform of the energy sector in Ukraine. It will be unbundling, so transportation system will become an independent operator, and we might see what's actually is being confirmed, at least over record by Ukrainian side, what the delivery point of Russian gas will be moved on Ukraine-Russia border. And quite an interesting thing that might arrange everybody. I mean, that might arrange the European companies which will come where and will be interested in like exploring the domestic gas market with quite high prices. If national carriers stabilize, I mean, and will be economic growth, I mean, that will be an interesting piece of pie, taking into account how depressed is the gas market in Europe. It might be interesting for Russians if they get, I mean, let's say, to sell the gas directly. They don't have like additional volume. They don't have like this problems with transit. I mean, or green on the transit prices, which will be definitely high. Ukraine will be very likely to compensate the loss of the volumes. And of course, in case of this, we'll see, I mean, it's absolutely interesting thing. I mean, and then if he comes here, I mean, let's say what's happening, we will see also what's actually will be happening with LNG. An interesting point for LNG, but look, I think nobody mentioned it. I mean, I think it was quite an interesting thing. We are witnessing an interesting situation in Europe with extremely low prices for LNG. And still, look at the capacity usage, which is less than 30% of the build. So like there's never been a period with such a gas at such a low prices coming, and capacity is like more than 2/3 idle. I mean, so is there any point of developing it further? I mean, let's say question is like, I mean, let's say what would be the future for this? I mean, it's quite an interesting thing. And regarding American LNG, I mean, it's also definitely will come, but also for the peaks, the price peaks. I mean, let's say, and but not in the bigger volumes. And here we come to an interesting point. I would like to conclude my remarks with what Chow was mentioning about whether energy security or energy is a public good. And here we have these things where energy is being very heavily politicized on both sides. I mean, you see how, like, any example, I mean, would it be Nord Stream or Klaipėda terminal in Lithuania? It's a very political decisions. They are not commercial. Like, of course, Lithuanians claim that because of a terminal we had a discount, but it's only partly true. Like, just see how the contract is structured. The contract is a typical oil-linked running formula, which went down because our prices are very low, and these contracts actually, which used to be very high a year ago, 2 years ago, will be extremely low, I mean, by December, and spot prices in Europe would be extremely expensive. I mean, that's the thing. And question is, like, whether it's acceptable should be decided by anyone. Lithuanians thought it contributes to the energy security, we want to pay it. But that's, when you do it, you should clearly understand this is political decision, which is the price you pay for this, I mean, let's say, and then you should accept it. Let's say, same for Russians. I mean, transit via Ukraine is possibly cheaper than Nord Stream if you like take into account the whole thing. But this factor of unpredictability from Gazprom, the Russia's point of view, whatever, is put into the equation. Like many things like this. I mean, they go also to Germany, it's Energiewende, when actually consumers are subsidized industry, I mean, let's say, to build a renewable. It's also a political choice. But when you make it, you should be very clear. I mean, it's not try to hide it into like commercial equations, but really clear saying this is the price to pay. It's not commercial decision or not entirely commercial decision, but we accept this because A, B, and C. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. And if there are, I know the lunch is there, and I'm aware that people have been sitting in this room for a number of hours now. If there are questions from the room, they're very, very welcomed.
For Mehmet, in regard to, you mentioned about Russia and China, and sometimes I get the impression that the negotiations on Altai is a way to get better prices from Turkmenistan, for example, or from Central Asia. If you could maybe give me your views on that, because Altai just seems like it will never happen, and it seems that they try to keep this alive in order, you know, the Chinese are hedging other players, and you kind of skirted around the issue between Russia and China, but it seems like that deal is frozen, nothing's happening whatsoever. The price was always the issue, but now the Chinese say, we don't have any money, we can't help you build the pipeline. So maybe you could, you know, shed some light on that. Thank you.
Yes, I think these two projects, Power of Siberia and Altai, and I think Altai was designed somehow to cut back the flow of gas from Central Asia, because Kazakhs also wanted to add some additional volumes to China through the pipeline. So there will be an intergas competition between Central Asia and Russia to enter the Chinese market. One of the reasons why Chinese are reluctant right now is that the demand growth in China is also somehow depressed because of what's happening overall. And also there's an oversupply of China, because China already has its own resources, Sichuan Basin and Ordos, and also Xinjiang, Tarim, Jungar. They already have the natural gas, and they are also moving into coal methane. Then I think the shale gas reserves in China are more than what US has, which is not being, of course, developed for other reasons. And in terms of external supply, Myanmar will be providing gas to China, and also LNG will be coming in bigger amounts from Australia and the rest. Therefore, China has not created the gasification of the economy fully yet to absorb all the gas that will be coming. The potential is there, but it will take some time. Therefore, I think they would probably keep the second one, the Altai gas pipeline, more on the back burner. And the price-wise, I think with Turkmenistan, there's a special deal, because the Chinese are doing it from the well to the market. So they are extracting the gas through a production sharing contract, bringing it to building also the pipeline, which they already did, and bringing to the market. And such a business model, nobody is able to do right now, because Turkmens keep telling everybody that come and get it on the border. And therefore, right now I think Chinese are getting around 26, 28 BCM of gas from Turkmenistan, which will go up to 40, and it can go up to 80, 85 BCM in the future. And the pricing is not only cash payment, but also some barters involved. And therefore, probably these projects will not go ahead, both of them, Power of Siberia and Altai project, which will involve more than $400 billion of investment. And in this current environment, I don't think anybody will be able to put their hands into pocket for such a huge bill.
Just to add a minute on your question, I think actually the whole strategy of negotiations with China on Altai, on behalf, like from point of view of Gazprom, was the biggest mistake. I mean, we could have done it, I mean, let's say 2008, and just briefly explain why, from point of view of Gazprom, Altai is much more interesting than supplies via the western route, because you already had a huge oversupply of gas in Yamal. The gas is super cheap. I mean, it's already like, Gazprom can increase the production capacity by 100 BCM almost immediately. The essential thing is only to build a pipeline. And here comes, I mean, let's say, the interesting point on negotiations. If you let Chinese companies to build the pipeline, this gas will be competitive even compared to Turkmenistan gas. I mean, let's say. But for like a number of reasons, and we see it with Power of Siberia, Gazprom is not willing, I mean, let's say, to subcontract Chinese companies or to give them the power of building the infrastructure, like, and that's obviously, I mean, let's say for China, Mehmet mentioned very correctly, is not so interesting now. We have so many options entering this region. I mean, let's say you have two contracts with Turkmenistan, Kazakh and Uzbek gas, I mean, let's say gas from Myanmar, I mean, etc., etc. I mean, this gas is competitive, but they want to have it at a very low price. I mean, if they would sign it. And I think the biggest mistake here on how Gazprom was in 2008, they underestimated the length of the demand crisis in Europe. They thought demand would be back, I mean, let's say, very soon, and they didn't make any progress. I think 2008 was a very good year where we could have really like make some concessions, because from their point of view, it's very easy. Just build the infrastructure. You don't have to like deal with very difficult gas fields like Kavykta, for instance, I mean, let's say, and other fields in eastern Siberia where where you're supposed to source the gas for power of Siberia. That's, I mean, let's say, the biggest mistake, but I agree, I mean, let's say, like, with Mehmet, I mean, let's say, like, only one of them will go, and most probably, like, power of Siberia.
I think from a Chinese point of view, it was entirely about, I agree with you, entirely about bargaining the Turkmen down. So after spending 10 years telling the Russians that we don't want the Western route, why did China finally accede to signing an MOU at the APEC summit in November beyond giving Putin a photo op? Is that it was terribly useful since the project isn't going to happen anyway. I think strategically it's much more important for China, the eastern route. Northeast Asia needs the gas. It's stranded from supply from both in terms of land pipelines from Central Asia, it's very far away, also somewhat stranded from LNG as well. So there's very little alternative. So I think strategically for both countries, the eastern route is much more important. The problem is the deal was signed in May of 2014, and in June, the price of oil collapsed. In July, the West sanctioned Russia. So now what the price that was agreed to maybe in May of 2014 doesn't look so good anymore when the price of the commodity dropped and Russian country risk went up. So I mean, the dog that I would watch to hear bark is whatever happened to the prepayment and Chinese loans of up to $25 billion that was discussed around that time. We have heard nothing about it in the past year and a half. So I agree with Mehmet. It's a matter of time, but that's the pipeline that will go first. I'm pretty convinced. And you know, I actually have a top 10 list of Russian pipeline projects on the CSIS website if you care to look at that paper.
Thank you very, very much. I think it was very, very useful and intriguing and challenging at times. It was very good. Thank you very much. Thank you.